There's far more to Interstellar than spaceships, black holes, and mysterious libraries. Oh yeah, we almost forgot to mention the possible extinction of the human race. From the film's original director to real-life discoveries, here's the untold story of Christopher Nolan's epic sci-fi adventure. Interstellar wasn't exactly in what's known as production hell, since interest in making the film always remained high. However, the script had spent the better part of a decade getting bumped around Hollywood before screenwriter Jonathan Nolan suggested his brother Christopher should helm the project. Before that, the movie was the passion project of Steven Spielberg, who'd been inspired by a presentation on wormholes by Caltech's Kip Thorne, and he planned to tackle the film after 2012's Lincoln. Sadly, Spielberg was forced to depart the project in 2007 after he failed to make a deal with Paramount, the studio behind Interstellar. Enter Chris Nolan, and the rest is Hollywood history. Interestingly, the original draft of the script is a far cry from the one we actually got. Sure, Matthew McConaughey's character Cooper still flies through a wormhole in search of a new home for mankind. However, his daughter Murph, played by Mackenzie Foy and Jessica Chastain, was written as a boy, and a fallen space probe brings Cooper to NASA, as opposed to the Gravity bookshelf ghost in Murph's bedroom. Stranger still, the Lazarus missions preceding Cooper's trips through the wormhole never happened.
You sent probes into that?
Mm-hmm. We sent people into it 10 years ago.
The Lazarus missions.
Our heroes only visit the ice planet and find a Chinese base. Oh, and Matt Damon's character is replaced by aliens and killer robots. At CinemaCon 2014, Christopher Nolan said in a Q&A session, "For me, Interstellar is about harking back to films I saw when I was a child." He's frequently cited 2001: A Space Odyssey in particular as being profoundly influential on his career. He and his Interstellar crew also watched Philip Kaufman's 1983 space epic The Right Stuff, which Nolan had high praises for. Nolan also cited Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Jaws as having the type of spirit he wanted to capture with Interstellar. But for Nolan, Interstellar wasn't just about paying homage to his favorite movies as a kid. He wanted to inspire the audience to fall in love with space travel again and encourage them to support continued public investment in the sciences by making a film celebrating that very thing. When discussing the film at Comic-Con in 2014, he said, "I grew up in a time when to be an astronaut was the highest ambition of any child. I felt that had fallen off greatly over the last couple of decades." Kip Thorne, a Caltech physicist who'd collaborated on 1997's Contact, and who'd long since wanted to make a film about time travel and wormholes, was attached to Interstellar from its inception, Chris Nolan pun definitely intended. When Nolan was hired to direct, Thorne made him promise two things: nothing in the film could violate known laws of physics, and anything speculative featured in the movie would come from a scientist, not a screenwriter. Nolan agreed on both counts. Thorne, who was both a consultant and executive producer on the film, describes having friendly battles with Nolan over things the director wanted to include, like faster-than-light travel that violated the laws of physics. Eventually, according to Thorne, Nolan reached the point where he appreciated intuitively that the problems I was pointing out were insurmountable. Then he simply abandoned the idea of faster-than-light travel and moved in another direction. Still, he remembers the time fondly, saying, "It was brainstorming in the best sense of the word, an artist and a scientist coming at a complex issue together, trying to generate ideas in the context of a story that is just coming into being." Thorne has since gone on to write The Science of Interstellar, diving deep into the physics behind the film. In order to elevate the science of the film rather than the fiction, the Interstellar crew actively tried to avoid corny genre tropes or fantastical elements.
Use the Force, Luke.
One of the most important scientific elements was making sure the spacesuits were firmly based on existing technology. A costume designer, Mary Zofries, explained,
"The spacesuit has a NASA aesthetic that's a little bit more modern, a little bit updated, as opposed to a slick sort of sci-fi aesthetic."
Real space explorers, for obvious reasons, have little use for gratuitous design-focused features on their suits or ships. Zofries tried to recreate that feel as well.
"Everything on the suit, to me, has a purpose. Nothing's really decorative."
Anne Hathaway has cited the subtle discomfort of the suits as helping the actors get into the right emotional headspace for the film's darker moments. As she put it, wearing a suit that wasn't really the easiest thing in the world to wear really, I thought, helped the performances. By the time Interstellar was being produced, fans had learned not to question Christopher Nolan's eye for acting talent. When he was initially cast as the lead in this film, Matthew McConaughey was also known as something of a rom-com staple, similar to how Heath Ledger was seen when he was cast as the Joker. But by the time cameras started rolling, McConaughey had turned out acclaimed performances in Dallas Buyers Club, Mud, and The Wolf of Wall Street, and he was starring in the acclaimed HBO series True Detective. In other words, he'd proven himself as a dramatic actor to be reckoned with well before Nolan got the chance to elevate him. Nolan's real personality was also a surprise to McConaughey. The actor expected the director to be a difficult perfectionist. Instead, he was surprised to find him to be easygoing and open to suggestions from the people he worked with. McConaughey ended up praising Nolan's leadership and problem-solving skills. Lesser filmmakers might choose to work out of a single sound studio and just green or blue screen in whatever exotic environments the movie might require. But Christopher Nolan isn't one to take shortcuts. He couldn't actually travel to many of the extraterrestrial locations portrayed in the film, of course, but he could at least bounce production around to various locations here on Earth that, with a little movie magic, could be made to resemble alien planets. Scenes featuring small-town America and endless cornfields besieged by dust bowls were filmed in Alberta, Canada. The massive, cavernous interior of the underground NASA facility we see a bit later on was filmed in a Los Angeles hotel. Scenes that took place on the various exotic planets featured in the movie were filmed in Iceland, where Anne Hathaway nearly got hypothermia.
I don't know that much about hypothermia, but what are the symptoms? And he said, why do you want to know? And I explained what was going on. And he said, oh.
Nolan had actually been to Svina-Felskirgich Glacier before, where the crew filmed scenes taking place on Matt Damon's icy planet during the making of 2005's Batman Begins. Parts of Game of Thrones were also shot there, so it's the go-to spot if you need an icy setting for your sci-fi movie or fantasy series. The fact that Interstellar has a shockingly small amount of CGI probably isn't that surprising to people familiar with Christopher Nolan's work. After all, the director famously dislikes using CGI.
I think we're at a point of visual effects where computer graphics have been around so long that there's nothing new or fresh about it as a technology.
He'll still use it if there's no other choice, but if there's a way to build a set or get an effect through practical means, he'll take it. Interstellar, which won an Oscar for visual effects, was no different. The dust storm in the film, for example, was created by having trucks cart around giant fans that blew dirt all over the set. Miniatures and models were used to capture the endurance in various command centers. Even the Tesseract sequence in the film's climax, when Cooper floats through a 5-dimensional environment to reach back through time and communicate with his daughter via her bedroom, was done without any green screens whatsoever. Instead, the visual effects team explored slit scan photography, a technique pioneered in 2001: A Space Odyssey that utilizes longer than normal exposure times to create the impression of an object spreading out through time itself. Christopher Nolan is known for a few things, and a love of IMAX cameras is chief among them. Like his other movies, much of Interstellar was filmed with an IMAX camera. Thing is, IMAX cameras are massive, unwieldy behemoths. They can get gorgeous shots, but it takes a lot of infrastructure to support one, and therefore, it wasn't feasible to film a whole movie using one until a few years after Interstellar came out. Still, Nolan demanded the camera be used to grab as many shots as possible, many of which were deemed infeasible due to the camera's weight. So the crew got creative, eventually mounting the beast on helmets, the front of planes, and even bodies. IMAX Chief Quality Officer David Keeley said,
"People said you could never handhold an IMAX camera. Well, he certainly proved that is a fallacy."
Kip Thorne wasn't simply an advisor the director would call when he had a science question. Thorne did a massive amount of research and number crunching on his own to ensure that what was featured in the film was indeed scientifically plausible. Nowhere in the movie is this more evident than in its depiction of the black hole. Nolan sent visual effects supervisor Paul Franklin to Thorne and asked him to develop equations that would simulate real-world physics for their effects software. After weeks of exhaustive research, Thorne sent the math to Franklin, whose team used it to build a black hole. According to Wired, recreating the black hole required a year of work and a team of over 30 people. One of the biggest problems the team faced was getting their rendering program to treat light as if it traveled along curved paths as it would near a massive object like a black hole. Given the new instructions, the computer took more than 100 hours to render certain frames, but it's hard to argue it wasn't worth it. The result is one of the greatest and most memorable visual effects sequences in cinematic history. Since the effects software used to create the black hole for Interstellar was based on actual physics, and since it was a more in-depth rendering of a black hole than had ever been done, the team behind it had a rare opportunity to get a sneak peek into the workings of real black holes. Eugenie von Tunzelmann, one of the CG supervisors on the film, created an accretion disk by generating a flat, multicolored ring and dropping it into orbit around the computerized spinning black hole. What happened next surprised everyone, even physicist Kip Thorne. The accretion disk, which is the swirling belt of superheated gas and matter orbiting the event horizon, was actually warped itself, so it appeared above, below, behind, and around the object. As visual effects supervisor Paul Franklin told Wired, so rather than looking like Saturn's rings around a black sphere, the light creates this extraordinary halo. The discovery actually led to some real scientific papers being published on the subject of gravitational lensing in the context of supermassive black holes. Legendary film composer and frequent Nolan collaborator Hans Zimmer was, as usual, Nolan's first pick to score Interstellar. However, he wanted to see what he could come up with when he only had a minuscule fraction of the script to work with.
What I wrote for Hans to get him started was some dialogue that I'd written for the film mixed with some ideas behind the film.
Essentially, he wanted the composer freed up from genre conventions by withholding information regarding the genre and scale of the movie, forcing Zimmer to base his music on the film's human center. Zimmer misread the script as being about the relationship between a father and son, and he wrote about his own children. Nevertheless, Nolan fell in love with it. Only then did he reveal the nature of the film to Zimmer. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite space movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.